Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Faith Living Church. You know, it was a few years ago, and some of you that have been around for a while may remember, but remember when Pastor Ron was talking a lot about Cumberland Farms? Does anybody remember that? Yeah, it is a great store. It's a whole lot greater than it used to be, though, right? The new and improved. And we were talking about at that time, he had gone in at Cumberland Farms, one of the newer ones, one of the reinvented ones, and he said, wow, with a friend of his, he said, wow, what happened, and he said, well, they just reinvented Cumberland Farms and came up with a new look and a new, just an amazing transformation took place. And so at that time we were talking about, we believe that God wanted to reinvent Faith Living Church. And we went through some different changes. We had the cafe set up for a video venue at that time, and the Blue House too, as we needed more space, and just all different kinds of things. We just started doing some things differently. And, as we're starting 2025, and those of you who heard the message last week know where we're headed with this, but, I believe God wants to reinvent Faith Living Church again. He is reinventing us. Again, to become one with Thrive Church, and with our son Judah, Pastor Judah Thomas as our pastor, and we're very excited to have him here tonight. So, Pastor Judah Thomas.
Welcome. So glad to be here with you all tonight. Man, it has been a while since I've been up here. And so for those of you that we have not met, my name is Judah, and lead pastor of Thrive Church. And I'm going to be talking to you today about dreams and the dreams that we experience in our life. God has given us dreams, and there's a difference between the good dreams that we may have and the God dreams that we may have. And along with this, we're looking at the life of Joseph. Joseph in the Old Testament, this is the first part of the Bible, the history of the Jewish nation. Joseph was the youngest at the time of 11 children, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob's children. And Joseph was kind of like, the first thing we hear about Joseph was that he was kind of this bratty tattletale of a teenager. 17-year-old, thought he knew everything. He was getting the special treatment. He was dad's favorite. He was the favorite child. He was getting all the special clothes. And then on top of that, he had these dreams, these fantastic dreams, these dreams of grandeur that his brothers would be bowing down in front of him. Then another dream that his brothers and his parents would be bowing down in front of him. And then he goes along and he starts telling everybody about it. I mean, the Bible says that his brothers hated him, but they hated him because of these dreams and how he talked about them. He was just like rubbing it in their face. Like, one day you're going to be bowing down. You know what it's like to have the favorite child around, and you're not the favorite child, right? It's like this feeling of inadequacy. And so he's talking about these things. And before long, if you know the story, you know that the brothers, they'd had enough of that. And they took him and they sold him off into slavery. They brought his clothes bloodied back to his father. So his father thought that he was mauled by wild animals. And he's sold into slavery. And he's in Potiphar's house, the captain of the guard in all of Egypt. And he's there, and everything he does prospers. And then he's falsely accused, and then he's thrown into prison. And it just seems like as soon as he takes a step forward, he gets knocked back again. And he steps forward and he keeps getting knocked back. And instead of giving up in these difficult times, though, he continues applying himself, doing the things that are in his power to do, and he excels. It says that God blesses him in everything that he does. And he's betrayed, and then he's imprisoned, and then there's two prisoners that come in, and they both work for the Pharaoh. You have the cupbearer of the Pharaoh and the baker of the Pharaoh, and they both get these dreams. And they tell Joseph the dreams, and he interprets them. And he says, in 3 days, you're both going to be released. And the cupbearer, you are going to be back to your position of honor. And the baker, well, sorry, but you're going to be executed. And he's like, well, who asked you anyway? And sure enough, just as he predicted, these dreams came to pass, and the baker was executed. The cupbearer was put back in his position of honor. And he says, when you go back into the palace of the Pharaoh, will you please remember me? But he was forgotten. He was forgotten once again. Many of you know what it feels like to be betrayed, to be forgotten, to feel left behind, to have a dream, but it seems like the dream is just dead in the ground. You had a dream, you had an idea, you felt like God was calling you to do something, and it just never seemed to take root. What do you do when it feels like your dream is dead? So today we see how God specializes in resurrecting dreams that seem impossible, and how he has the power and the ability to turn them into something greater than what we could ever imagine. 2 years after the cupbearer's dream, so you remember the cupbearer had a dream and that he would be released and he was reinstated to his position of honor, and sure enough he was. And Joseph said, don't forget about me. He forgot about him for 2 years. And then one day the Pharaoh has a dream, and the Pharaoh calls all of his advisors, all of his wise counsel. He calls them all together because this dream, this 2 dreams actually, and they disturbed him so much he felt there was some significance to the dream. He says, can anybody interpret the dream? And the cupbearer's like, now that I think about it, there was this guy in prison who interpreted a dream that I had and a dream that the baker had, and they both came true. They both came to pass. So here's where we pick up. In Genesis chapter 41, verse 14, it says, Pharaoh sent for Joseph at once, and he was quickly brought from the prison. And after he shaved and changed his clothes, because you couldn't go into the Pharaoh's chambers looking not presentable, right? I mean, they had to clean him up. They had to shave him up. He had to be looking good for this Pharaoh. After he shaved and changed his clothes, he went in and stood before the Pharaoh. Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, I had a dream last night, and no one here can tell me what it means. But I've heard that when you hear about a dream, you can interpret it. Verse 16, it's beyond my power to do this, Joseph replied, but God can tell you what it means and set you at ease. And even in this, you can kind of notice this change that had come to Joseph. From the kind of the cocky teenager who was bragging about his dreams of grandeur, now he's not making any claims. He's like, I can't do this. Only God has the power and the ability to do this. He was no longer this proud boy bragging about a dream, because the pit and the prison had brought humility. Brought some humility. He was humbled now. He was in a position now where he realized that God was in control. See, if God just gave you your dream, if he just made it all happen immediately, you know what we would do? We'd take credit for it. Be like, yeah, I did that. Like, yeah, I'm just patting myself on the back. Didn't I do a good job with that? And we see that throughout the Bible. People had a dream and they tried to fulfill it in their own way. Moses and David, all these people tried to fulfill things in their own way. We're like, look what I did. Look what I did. But here's the thing. God wants us to learn humility before he fulfills the dream. He wants us to learn humility, how to walk in humility. Maybe you've been through a time like that where you've been humbled, right? Where you've had to learn humility. You've had a little slice of humble pie, maybe. A couple years ago, I was down in Florida, and I went to the gym with a friend, and I was kind of new to working out at the time, and I went to this gym, and they had this machine called a hack squat machine. I don't know if you've ever seen one. It's kind of looks like a medieval torture device, but it's like this sled on a 45-degree angle, and you put all this weight on it, and you put it on your shoulders, then you do squats inside of it. It's supposed to be a safe way to do squats. So I'm watching a guy doing this, and he had 4 45-pound plates on either side. So like 360 pounds, he's doing this, and he's kind of a small guy. At least that's what I'm like, he's kind of a small guy. So I'm like, I'm getting ready to use the machine, but I'm a bigger guy than he is, or so I thought. So I'm like, I threw a couple extra plates on there, because I'm like, you know what? I can handle this. So I get there and and everybody's watching me now because they must be like, oh, wow, look at this guy. I pull it off the pins and I go down and I could not go back up again. I was stuck down there. Had like 4 people running over. Girls too. They're just like trying to lift this. Like, what are you doing? And the guy who was on there first, he's like, you might want to start with a little bit lighter weight, you know? We get humbled sometimes. Humbled. We never like it when we get humbled, but sometimes that's what we need. See, before God gives us the fulfillment of the dream, we have to learn some humility. We have to learn humility. We have to walk through the humility. It says in James chapter 4, verse 10, it says, humble yourselves before the Lord, and he will lift you up in honor. Humble yourself. Do you want to be honored by God? Yeah, of course. Like, we all want to be honored by God, but here's the prerequisite. It says, before you're honored by God, first you have to humble yourself. First you have to humble yourself. And in the life of Joseph, we see him full of pride, thinking that he's got it all together, thinking, oh, one day I'm going to be this big, bad ruler. But instead, he had to go through the pit and the prison. He had to learn some humility before the honor came. See, humility becomes before honor. It's important for us to realize that in the story of life, we are not the main character in it. We are not, like, you are not the main character. I am not the main character. God may give you a dream or an idea, a goal, a vision, but we are not the main character. In fact, just because God uses you doesn't mean it's about you. Just because he uses you, we have to realize that ultimately it's about him, and it's for his honor and for his glory. It's his plan and his goal and his purpose. Joseph in the beginning thought that he was the main character. Oh, I'm the ruler, and you're all going to bow down to me. You're all going to be subservient. You're all going to be my servants. But he didn't realize that the real purpose of him going to this position of honor was to protect a nation. The nation of Israel, to protect the 12 tribes of Israel, to protect one specific tribe, the tribe of Judah, with which the Messiah would be born one day. See, there was a greater purpose. It wasn't about Joseph. It was about protecting a people. It was about God's ultimate plan to bring a Messiah here to this earth. See, God is shaping us through the hard times. Like, we don't like hard times. We don't like the difficulties. We don't like the storms. We don't like the sickness. We don't like the adversity. We don't like the problems that we face. But you know what? Have you ever noticed this? We don't learn as much in the good times. When things are going good, like we're just like, yeah, things are going great. Everything's going good. And we can kind of take it easy. We're not learning as much in the good times. When we learn is when we learn in the fire. We learn in the flood. We learn in the storm, in the adversities of life. That's when we learn the most. So, Pharaoh had these 2 dreams, and they were very similar. The first dream he had was that there was 7 plump, fat cows beside the Nile River. And then 7 scrawny cows came up out of the river and ate those 7 cows. So that was the first dream. Second dream was that there was 7 heads of grain that were very plump and very healthy heads of grain. And then 7 unhealthy heads of grain grew up and then devoured the other one. So this confused Pharaoh. It bothered him. So then he calls Joseph in, and Joseph interprets them. It says that they're both the same dream. The 7 plump cows, the 7 plump heads of grain, they represent 7 years of prosperity for the nation of Egypt and the surrounding areas. And then the second 7, the 7 unhealthy ones, are going to be 7 years of famine that's just going to devastate the entire land. So then Joseph, he gives the interpretation for the dream, and he's like, hey, I'm here. I might as well just go for it. So he starts giving advice to Pharaoh now. He says, what you should do is you should find a wise person that you could put in charge of all of Egypt. And then what you do is start collecting crops. Collect 1/5 of all of the crops that are produced over these 7 years of bounty, and store them up and keep them secure. Store it and guard it so that way you can have enough to provide for the nation in the times of famine. In Genesis 41:37, it says, Joseph's suggestions were well received by Pharaoh and his officials. So Pharaoh asked his officials, can we find anyone else like this man, so obviously filled with the Spirit of God? Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, since God has revealed the meaning of dreams to you, clearly no one else is as intelligent or as wise as you are. You will be in charge of my court, and all my people will take orders from you. Only I, sitting on the throne, will have a rank higher than yours. Pharaoh said to Joseph, I hereby put you in charge of the entire land of Egypt. Isn't that amazing? He goes from the prison to second in command of all of Egypt. It's like he's an overnight success, right? You know, we hear that expression, oh, this person, they're an overnight success, but really is it? I mean, ultimately, this was a 13-year-long night for Joseph. It wasn't just, I mean, he was in the pit. He was in slavery. He was in the prison for 13 years as God was shaping him and preparing him and teaching him. See, every overnight success is often years in the making. And we wonder what God is doing through these times of waiting and these times of difficulty. And here we see he goes from the pit to the palace to the prison. But Joseph's sudden promotion from prisoner to second in command, it could seem like an overnight success, but really it was God's timing at work. And God's timing brought Joseph to Pharaoh at the exact moment that he was needed. Had he not been there at the right, imagine if 11 or 12 years in, he just gave up. So, no, you know what? I'm done with this. I'm done with this applying myself. You know what? I'm in prison. Nothing's happened. I mean, even the cupbearer forgot about me. I'm just going to sit here and take it easy until the day I die. He would have missed the opportunity that God had for him. But he was ready. He was waiting. God was shaping him and working in him in this difficult time. See, he had to go through it all. The time of waiting was not wasted. We don't like waiting very much. Anybody like waiting? No, of course not. Like, we don't like to wait. This is why we have Amazon Prime, right? It's like, I want it now. That's why we want fast food. This is like, we want it. Maybe it's not good for me, but it's fast and it's hot. Like, it's like, I just want it and I want it now. But the waiting time is not wasted. God was preparing Joseph through every trial for this moment, so that he would be ready and it wasn't for him. It wasn't about him. Again, when he was younger, he thought it was going to be about him, but it wasn't. He was there so that he could save his family. And see, we need to trust in God's timing, even when it feels like nothing is happening. Even if it may feel like God has forgotten about you and you're in a difficult time, like, God, where are you now when I need you? See, what feels dead to us is never beyond God's ability to resurrect. See, we serve a God who specializes in resurrection, and God resurrects the dream that Joseph had. Now the real dream still wasn't even fulfilled for another 9 to 10 years later. It was about 22, 23 years from the time he was sold into slavery until the full fulfillment of the dream had happened. But Joseph began full of pride, but he learned humility in the process. He became a ruler, and then he got married, and he had 2 kids, and they had the 7 years of plenty, and they stockpiled food, and they stored up food, and they had all these buildings that they would store it in. So they stored so much food, they actually lost count of how much grain they had. They just had so much. And then the famine hit. 7 years in, the famine at last hit, proving again the dream that Joseph had interpreted. A little while later, after this famine hits the entire land, people are starving all around. Animals are starving all around. And guess who shows up? If you know the story, you know who shows up? Joseph's brothers. They show up. And they're looking for food. And guess who they find? The leader of Egypt, Joseph. Except he doesn't reveal his identity to them. They just come in, but he immediately recognizes them. And I don't know, like if you read this, you kind of feel this tension. It's like he almost doesn't know what to do. So he accuses them of being spies. He's like, we're going to start there. It's like, so he said, you guys are all spies. And he accuses them of being spies. They're like, we're not spies. They're like, there's 12 of us brothers, and one of them's dead, referring to Joseph, and another one, Benjamin, the youngest. Now he's back home, and he didn't come with us, so there's just 10 of us here. And Joseph's like, no, you're all spies. And he throws them in prison for 3 days. They're locked up there. Then he brings them out and says, okay, you know what? I'll send you home with your grain, but I'm not selling you any more grain until you bring your youngest brother to come see me. And as for collateral, I'm going to keep one of you. And he grabs Simeon and ties him up in front of them all, and ties him up, throws him into prison. And then the other 9, they head off home. Joseph tells his officials, says, put all the money they paid for the grain, put it back on top of their bags of grain. So as they're going home now, they open up the grain to get a little bit, I guess, and they see their money. They're like, we've been framed. They're like, now when we come back, like we've been framed for stealing the money and all this stuff. They're like, we can't spend that. We got to just save it till the next time we have to come back again. A year later, they start getting hungry again. They run out of food. They're like, we got to go back. We got to go back and get some more food. I wonder how Simeon's doing this whole time. Like, right? Like he's just hanging out in prison for a year. Like, I mean, I don't know. He's just there. I mean, he didn't get to go back home. Didn't get to be with his family. But now that the brothers, they need some food. They say to their dad, hey, we got to go back. We got to buy more food. And this time we have to bring Benjamin with us. Dad is just like, no. He's like, I've already lost Joseph. Now I've lost Simeon. And now I'm going to lose Benjamin. There's no way. They said, well, then we just all starve together. It's either take this risk or we're all going to starve here. So finally he gives permission. They go back. And when they go back, again, they come in front of Joseph and he sees them and he recognizes them. This time, he has a little bit of a better strategy. He brings them in. He has dinner with them. He sets them up, puts them all at the table from oldest to youngest. They don't know who he is still because he's like, he looks different than he did when they sold him off. And so they have dinner together and then he sends them on their way. But before he does, he takes like his special cup and tells them to put it on top of Benjamin's sack and seal it up. So as they're going, then he sends his guards after them and says, okay, somebody here stole, this guy's special cup. And they said, well, we didn't steal it, but if any one of us stole it, why don't you just kill him? And they're like, okay, sounds good to us. So they all agree to this and they find out, sure enough, it's in Benjamin's. Now they're like, oh, great. Now, what have we done? What have we said? So they all come marching back. They come back, and now they're panicked because now Benjamin has this sacred cup for them, and they come and they bring him before Joseph. Look what happens here in Genesis 45, verse 2. It says, then he broke down and wept. And he wept so loudly, the Egyptians could hear him. And word of it quickly carried to the Pharaoh's palace. I am Joseph, he said to his brothers. Is my father still alive? But his brothers were speechless. I mean, you can imagine, like, they haven't seen him and over 20 years now. And here he is as the second in command of all of Egypt. His brothers were speechless. They were stunned to realize that Joseph was standing there in front of them. You can imagine the terror that they probably felt as well. Being in his presence, not knowing what he's going to do. But I find it interesting that his first reaction here was that he wept. You got this cocky kid at 17. And his brothers just despised him and hated him. They couldn't stand him. They sell him off into slavery. Like you gotta dislike someone pretty much, a lot to sell them into slavery. You're like, okay, I'm not even gonna kill you. I'm gonna sell you off to be a slave for the rest of your life. And now they're standing there, and his first reaction is that he weeps. See, originally he expected the dreams to be about him. And now he's overcome with emotion because the fulfillment of the dream has finally happened. And it's mixed emotions. I'm sure he feels this sense of betrayal, but there's this sense of being reunited with his family, with his brothers again. There's a feeling of forgiveness. There's feelings of fulfillment as well, as he's finally seeing the dream being fulfilled. We serve a God of life and not a God of death. He is a God who is full of resurrection power, a God of restoration, a God of revitalization, a God of renewal and regeneration, a God of resurrection. And when God resurrects a dream, it's always bigger than we could have ever imagined. And here we see this resurrection of this dream that for years and years Joseph thought was dead. Joseph thought this was never going to happen, and now he sees the fulfillment of it, and now he also begins to see the reason why. It wasn't about him. It was to save his family. In John 11:12 25. Jesus is speaking to Mary and Martha, and he says, Jesus told her, says, I am the resurrection and the life. Anyone who believes in me will live even after dying. He is the resurrection and the life. Only God has the power to bring life out of death. Only God has the power to take something that is dead and bring it to life again. In fact, God will often let something die so that he can demonstrate his power. We see this happen with Moses, and Moses felt this dream to lead the people out of Egypt in slavery, and he tried to do it his own way, and it didn't work out, and the dream had to die, but God brought it to life again. We see this happen with David being anointed to be king, but the dream had to die. We see Jesus himself, and he comes to this earth to save us, but then he dies on the cross, and things have to die in order to be resurrected. And when it's resurrected by God's power, we can't take credit for it because it's only him. He was the only one that has the ability. He says, I am the resurrection and the life. So is your dream dead? The dream that you feel like God may have given you, is that dead? Here's the thing. Keep your eyes on Jesus, not on the dream. See, we want to look at the dream, and sometimes we're looking at the dream too much that we take our eyes off of Jesus. It's like they say, you can't watch water boil. You ever try to do that, watch water boil? It's like the most boring thing in the world. Like you're there, you're like, I'm going to do it. I've tried it before. I'm like, I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it. I'm going to watch the water boil. I'm going to watch the water boil. And then I hear a noise and I look away and then I look back and now the water's boiling. It's like, you just can't do it. It's impossible. And that's how it is for many of us. Instead of keeping our eyes on Jesus, we have our eyes on some dream. And my eyes are on the dream instead of him. Don't keep your eyes on the dream. Keep your eyes on Jesus. It says in Isaiah 40, verse 31, it says, but they who wait for the Lord shall renew their strength. They who do what? They who wait. See, we don't like to wait. We don't like waiting rooms. We don't like waiting in lines. We don't like waiting at stoplights. Like, we don't like waiting. But it says here, but they who wait for the Lord, wait for his timing, wait for his deliverance, wait for him to move on his timeline. But they who wait for the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings like eagles. They shall run and not be weary. I started running last year, and I run and I get weary really quick. Way quicker than I wish I did. And I run. But here it says, if you wait on the Lord, you'll run and not weary. You shall walk and not faint. But you got to wait for it. You got to wait for it. But I want it now. I want it now. I want this to happen now. I want the relationship now. I want the job now. I want the raise now. I want the house now. I want this thing now. I want everything now. I want it now. But you got to wait for it. If you want to see it fulfilled, we got to wait for it. If you want to see the situation restored, you got to wait for it. If you want your strength to be renewed, you got to wait for it. You want to fly with wings like an eagle, you got to wait for it. You want to walk without fainting, you got to wait for it. You want to run and not grow weary, you got to have to wait for it. It's not just going to happen, you got to wait for it. Those who wait for the Lord, he'll renew their strength. See, God is never in a hurry. He's never we're in a hurry. Like some of you are in a hurry right now. Like, can we wrap this up so I can get dinner, right? Like, we're in a hurry, but God is never in a hurry. God is never, see, we plant seeds in the springtime because we have dreams of a fresh salad, don't we? Like, that's why I can't wait to have some tomatoes and I can't wait to have some lettuce. I want that fresh salad. We're planting seeds because we dream of a fresh salad, but the seeds got to die first. They got to be buried first. They got to be under the ground first. They got to sprout, and they're doing work that we can't even see. There's growth that we can't even see underneath the surface, and you got to wait for it. When you have a godly dream, this is a dream that builds faith rather than fear. This builds faith. We have faith that we can see what God has promised come to pass. Godly vision motivates people to action. That's what we need. We need a godly vision that motivates us to action. We need a godly vision that requires us to take a risk, to take a step of faith, to step out of our comfort zones from time to time. We need a godly vision that glorifies God and not ourselves. See, God will put the dream in our hand, but then he wants us to put it back into his hand. He gives you the dream, and we're like, oh, I got this dream. And he said, okay, now hand it back to me. Now I want you to trust me for the fulfillment. Yes, he's the dream giver, but he's also the dream fulfiller. Are we going to trust in him? Are we going to realize that it's not over when it seems like the situation is dead, when it seems like the situation isn't going anywhere, when you're going through the storms, you're going through the pits, feels like you're a slave to everything in life, you're in the pits of despair, you're in prison, it seems like it's not going anywhere, but it's not over yet because you got to wait for it. See, God works best when everyone else has given up hope, because he is the resurrection. Remember that verse we said, Jesus says, I am the resurrection and the life. Jesus didn't say that he brings resurrection. He says, I am the resurrection. I am the resurrection and the life. And whatever he touches comes to life again. And it doesn't matter what it is. It doesn't matter the situations that you're facing right now. It doesn't matter the diagnosis. It doesn't matter the discouragement. It doesn't matter the loss that you're going through. God is still there. He is still in control, and he is still resurrecting dead things and bringing them back to life again. Let's pray. Well, God, we come to you now and we thank you for your goodness to us. We thank you that you are a good God and you are the God who brings resurrection. You are the resurrection and the life. And so we put our trust in you, and we thank you for the dreams that you've given us and that you've put in our life. And we're also sorry for the times that maybe we have not been patient, not learned the lessons that we need to learn in the difficulties, in the pits, and the prisons. Lord, help us to learn all that you have for us. Let us apply it so that we can grow in humility and see the dream come to pass. You know, if you're here today and you don't know Jesus as your Lord, it says very simply in Romans that if you believe that God raised Jesus from the dead, that he brought that resurrection power to Jesus, he raised him from the dead, and you say with your mouth that he is your Lord, that you'll be saved. And so if that's where you are today, and you believe that God raised Jesus from the dead, then won't you just call on his name? Say, Jesus, you are my Lord, and you're saved. God, we thank you so much for your goodness. We thank you that you are the giver of dreams. We thank you that you have promised that you can do immeasurably more than we could ever ask, think, or imagine, that you are good. You have not lost control for even a moment in the situations that we face, in the adversity that we face, in the hardships that we may be going through, in the depression, the anxieties, the diagnosis, the sicknesses, the stresses that we feel in our life, that you have not lost control for a moment. And that we can wait on you. And when we do, you will renew our strength. We can mount up with wings like eagles. We can run and not grow weary. We can walk and not faint. We thank you for being our dream giver and the dream fulfiller. In Jesus' name, amen. Well, thank you guys so much for being here with us tonight. And if you decided that, hey, today's the day that I'm dedicating my life to God, if you want to stop back in the back, they have a gift for you. Also, if you need prayer, we'd encourage you to find someone that will pray for you. Find someone that's like normal looking even and say, hey, will you pray for me? And before you go, I want just to encourage you to just get out of your comfort zone for a minute. Find somebody that you don't know, or maybe you haven't talked to in a while, or maybe you think looks a little bit weird, honestly, and say hi to them, get to know them a little bit. Thank you guys so much for coming. We'll see you next week.